and welcome to Join Our Town. My name is Ethel Maharg, and I'll be your host for this program. We have with us today Paul Gessing, who is the president of the Rio Grande Foundation. We're going to be talking about the 2015 special legislative session. So let's talk about that. New Mexico Legislature recently met for a special session in Santa Fe. They already had the long one, now they have the short one. So why did they meet and what happened during this session?
Well, they met because during the 60-day session, they were unable to agree upon something known as a capital outlay bill. The capital outlay bill is, it's largely funded by the oil and gas severance taxes that our state collects when oil and gas are drilled in various areas of the state. The money goes to Santa Fe and then is distributed for a lot of capital projects. There was a great deal of controversy over the handling of that bill, whether taxes should be increased or not to fund roads, roads of course being a major capital expenditure. And ultimately, due to some partisan bickering and the way things happen sometimes in Santa Fe, they left after the 60-day session ended in March with no capital outlay bill. And then there was a lot of discussion. People said, oh, there's going to be a special session. There's not going to be a special session. Ultimately, agreement was reached really outside of the legislature, and there were backdoor meetings and kind of stuff that sometimes people complain about and wonder about the transparency. But the leaders met and they had a session that lasted about 4.5 hours on a recent Monday afternoon.
Okay. All right. So they met just recently, just for 4.5 hours?
Right.
To iron all this out?
Right. They passed a capital outlay bill.
Okay.
$295 million. The governor has recently vetoed about $1 million of that, so it's $294 million as signed into law. And then the governor, I think part of the reason that she wanted to get something else out of the deal, because the capital outlay process meant more to the legislators, those really dealing with the community needs. And she got a small tax cut package that is about $6 to $10 million in terms of what it'll reduce the revenues of the state by. Some things like medical tax exemptions for certain medical expenses, some tax breaks for businesses that locate their headquarters here. So the governor, again, is trying to make New Mexico more attractive to businesses and bring jobs and economic growth here. So those both were done during the special session, and both now have been signed into law. So I really doubt the legislature will meet now until mid-January of 2016.
Next year. Okay, great. Stated reason for the special session capital outlay bill in particular was job creation. And so what's your take on that action, and did it take place?
Well, I'm not a believer that by taxing you and me or taxing an industry like oil and gas that you're then taking that money and that's going to create jobs. What you're doing is you're taking money from certain groups and then the government takes it, and we're supposed to believe that because government now has the money, it's creating jobs. However, to the extent that there is needed infrastructure in particular, and unfortunately that's not what the capital outlay is all about, but to the extent that there's needed infrastructure, deteriorating roads, needed stuff like Santa Teresa's right along the border, and it's a booming area of our state, one of the few booming areas of our state, and they need better border crossings and roads leading to those crossings, and so Santa Teresa saw some money for that. Oil and gas industry, as I said, specifically oil in southeastern New Mexico, the Permian Basin has, because of the recent booming oil and gas industry down there, they've torn up the roads. The roads are in bad shape. So you needed some road construction money for those areas. But a lot of what gets done in the capital outlay bill is not necessarily essential infrastructure.
Okay. Are there any problems with the capital outlay process as it currently exists, and what could be done to change that?
There is a lot of improvement that needs to be made to the capital outlay process. Right now, it's, so one of the things that capital outlay is often called is a pork bill. Pork means, it's an old term, that pork barrel spending, and it's kind of special interest spending, where politicians literally just try to get as much money as they can to bring home to say to their constituents, hey, I'm doing something, I'm bringing home the bacon.
Yeah.
This is the way the process works. It's very unorganized. It's not very prioritized. There's no, hey, we all need this as a state. It's much more driven by parochial special interest. And if we had a process to prioritize, if we had maybe some third-party group or something that could recommend emphasizing certain things and de-emphasizing others, because we have everything from roads and integral infrastructure for border regions to senior centers, golf courses, a lot of stuff that may be relevant, but probably should be a local community priority, not a state community priority. And that's the process. Then you have the way capital money is spent in our state. Among other things, we spend too much, more than we get, because of a law on the books called Mini Davis-Bacon. And it's a prevailing wage provision that increases the cost of capital outlay projects in our state. Ohio did a study and showed that schools, when they lifted their Davis-Bacon, they got rid of this law in Ohio on school construction, they cut costs by about 11% overall. If we did this on schools, would be a start, but in general, we could get a lot more money for the dollar in capital outlay. We could get a lot more bang for our buck.
Okay, and that Davis-Bacon is to prevailing wage.
Prevailing wage, right.
Okay, all right. So to help people get more money, do they feel that they'll just get more money if they have that in place, or?
Well, it's the same amount of money, but the prevailing wage law, and it's just been addressed by the New Mexico Supreme Court. So the wage law is essentially negotiated by the labor unions. In a free market, it's much more, we have projects available and money to spend, and we're going to spend it at a market price, not favoring a certain group of people who's well connected and can lobby in Santa Fe. And essentially, that's how you see costs rise unnecessarily on these projects. We could get a lot more bang for our buck, more road, more school, et cetera, with the same amount of money.
Okay, all right. So how else might New Mexico taxpayers get more for their money in this process?
Well, really the prioritization is so key, and having some kind of system in place. In Oklahoma, they have a named commission. The governor names some people, the two parties in the legislature name some people, and they can eliminate projects. So if the legislature and the governor agree on something, but this commission thinks it's a bad idea, they can pull that out. They can't add anything to that priority list, but they can pull it out. And some kind of system that provides accountability so that real state priorities are being met. And then having something done so that local officials feel the responsibility to allocate their own money to their ambulance fleet or open space or the senior center or whatever. We really need to somehow make the local areas accountable rather than relying on this pot of money at the state level.
On the state too. Okay, do you think sometimes is that, you know, you said that sometimes it's based on the political system where they want to, is this sometimes to help you get elected again?
Oh, absolutely. That's really what it's all about in its current system, yeah. It's more of an election thing with the concerns about the actual projects being kind of secondary. Out of the $294 million, $45 million was for roads. And not all roads are 100% necessary, but roads tend to be kind of the basic thing that government does. When you think of what should government do, providing a system of roads so that people can easily get from place to place, and that ambulances can get to your house, and that goods can be moved from farms to market, et cetera. That's what we think government should be doing. And you know, only 45 million out of the 294 million was for roads. So I think we need to look at those priorities.
Okay. So the commission, like you were saying, would be a good idea to have system of order so that people can say, okay, these are the top priorities for the state, not necessarily in my area? Is that what you're saying?
Right, and some of those obviously could be local priorities in some respects, but they've got to have a statewide impact. And I think where we've gotten away from that is unfortunate.
Okay, all right. So just because a project received an appropriation in this bill, does it mean that it'll actually happen?
Well, that's another aspect of this process that needs to be worked on. You'll have, say, an interchange, something that is essential, a road, and the state will be putting money to it and say they need $50 or $100 million to rebuild this interchange. Well, they might only have $5 or $10 million. The legislator, the governor, whoever may only have the ability to get $5 or $10 million. So this money sits in a pot. You know, it may not be actually just sitting there, but somebody has this appropriation set up for this $50 million, but they've only got 10. Well, until you get the $50 million, you're not able to actually do the project. And so you have an issue where these priorities and these projects just sit there and wait and wait and wait.
Years?
And it can be a long time, especially if the economy goes down, you start appropriating money for something, and then the economy tanks or oil and gas prices tank, and then you just sometimes they get forgotten about. So that's a serious issue. The auditor, Tim Keller, state auditor, recently did a study and found $4 billion in unspent money essentially laying around. That's it's definitely a sign of a flawed process. There's no doubt about it. Not all of those projects, are it's not all about poor process and design, but a lot of that $4 billion can be attributed to these kinds of capital outlays where it's kind of incomplete.
Can they move it over? Something else?
No, capital outlay money can't really be moved over to the general spending, the day-to-day spending. It's
you have to save it until you're going to use it.
Right, and then the second part of that is that we frequently have a lot of capital outlay money. Generally, the state is capital rich because of the oil money that comes in, and that creates an incentive for entities to want to build the latest and greatest and spend a lot of money on capital projects. Well, then you have to go find the money to staff it and maintain it, and that has to come out of your general operating expenses, and that's a lot tougher sometimes. So you have these palatial buildings, and often you'll have them understaffed or even in disrepair because the operating costs and have eaten you up.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, Paul, thank you again so much for coming and sharing about the latest and greatest about the New Mexico session. And we thank you for having joined us on this segment of Joy in Our Town, and we'll see you the next time.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town brought to your home every day. So write Joy in Our Town, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.